Hello and welcome to another Tolling in Europe presentation. So there's a lot of talk and focus on electric vehicles right now, particularly among car manufacturers, leasing rental companies, and indeed any vehicle-related financial service companies. And whether you're building the vehicles, making them available to customers, or handling related transactions, it's fair to say that EVs are pretty much at the top of the hype curve right now, and with good reason. In our last presentation, we looked a little bit at electric vehicles as drivers of an important future trend which could one day replace existing fuel taxes, which of course are not paid by EVs, with distance-based prices, charges, which are. In this presentation, we wanted to delve a little bit deeper into this subject and examine how electrification of the fleet and tolling or road charging are natural bedfellows and can in fact be highly complementary, and in fact how one is likely to follow the other. Both involve a vehicle-related transaction and both offer a lot of opportunities for service providers looking to bundle services together. So if we take a short look at the growth of electric vehicles across Europe, I'm sure most people have seen a slide like this before. This shows the number of registrations of battery BEVs and plug-in electric vehicles, plug-in hybrid electric vehicles up to the end of 2019. As we can see, the overall numbers are relatively small, just over 520,000 vehicle registrations in 2019. However, this is at the beginning of quite a significant growth spike, and this has in fact continued even more strongly throughout 2020. And these aggregated numbers mask a little bit of the much larger proportional sales in certain countries, which we'll look at in a later slide. But I think what can be taken from this slide is that the adoption of electric vehicles is beginning to accelerate, and more importantly, this growth is sustained and sustainable going forward. Now, here I also wanted to look at the growth of tolling in Europe over the same time period, both in terms of network size and the number of vehicles with an electronic payment subscription of some kind. So first looking at the toll network, we can see that over the same period, 2010 to the end of 2019, the total toll network in Europe has roughly doubled from approximately 45,000 kilometers to 88,000 kilometers. We can also see that the number of ETC subscriptions, and this includes drivers with an account, or drivers or vehicles with an account linked to their either license plate, number plate, or an onboard unit. We can see that the number of these subscriptions has more than doubled over the same period. At this stage, it's misleading to suggest that there is a direct correlation between EVs and tolling. That's not what I'm suggesting at this stage. However, the point of this slide is to demonstrate how tolling has also grown strongly over the same time period to again become now a sustained and sustainable and increasingly accepted form of road infrastructure financing. So EVs have grabbed a lot of attention, not just because of growing customer demand, but because they also open up new possibilities for services to be offered in vehicle and directly to the driver. Some, of course, with the potential to disrupt existing industries and business models. And if we just look at some of these, first and foremost, there is, of course, the need to find charging locations for the vehicle, potentially rapid charging points as well, depending on what kind of journey you're making. This is something that's absolutely crucial for electric vehicles, which is not necessarily the case for combustion engine because the prevalence of fuel stations is much more widespread. Of course, once you've found that charging point, there is of course an associated payment. And this, unlike buying petrol today, although there is certainly a similar trend, for electric vehicles, we see this payment as increasingly embedded in the vehicle and or embedded within an e-wallet linked to the vehicle. So numerous car manufacturers have launched their own wallets over the last few years. Mercedes, Volkswagen, just as two examples, others likely to follow suit. Equally, there is a need to find suitable parking, again, perhaps at or close to a charging location. But of course, nobody also wants to drain their battery driving around in a congested area looking for a parking space. So finding suitable parking will grow in importance. Because of the need to build maybe a charging stop, certainly into longer journeys, the need to build that in advance, we think EVs will likely require a more sophisticated trip planning or navigation tool. This is something that Kapsch already enables from a tolling perspective within our UpRoad app, our mobile smartphone-based app. This gives users a trip planner with the option of both tolled and non-tolled routes, and also a clear explanation of what the cost and the time differences between those. It's the same with electric vehicles. When you're planning a longer trip, it's necessary in most cases to plan in a charging stop there, and you probably want a rapid charging point as well that fits seamlessly into the navigation of the trip. It's also possible that the payment for that charging service would also come as part of the trip experience as well in future. And given these growing possibilities to pay for charging via the vehicle, car manufacturers and other service providers will naturally seek to leverage this and offer other additional payment services, in-vehicle payment services. And again, as we shall see in more detail in a second, tolling is a natural partner here, a natural bedfellow. It's part of the trip, it's part of the cost of the trip, it can be planned in advance. You can, to a certain extent, estimate the cost in advance, and it's very much in our vision that this would be something that could be linked as a payment or linked as a trip experience. And finally, there are additional account management, or there is some additional account management involved in order to keep track of all the vehicle-related transactions, be they charging, parking, tolling, or whatever else. Perhaps this is also necessary to enable an expense claim later on in the case of a business trip. Almost all countries in Europe today have some form of tolling, of course, or congestion or road pricing. So tolls are always going to feature as part of the trip cost in the same way as charging the vehicle or parking the vehicle. From a toll tickets perspective, we believe, again, that tolling could be and should be part of this seamlessly integrated payment as part of the trip that will ultimately be handled by the same customer-facing provider as the electric vehicle charging and or parking payment provider, and that's something that we're working hard and we are open to partnering with others to achieve that. So looking in more detail at some stats for the three largest all-vehicle toll domains in Europe, we can see that tolling is, like charging, like parking, it's another important and high-frequency vehicle-related transaction. In France, the largest domain, more than 690 million toll transactions were made by light vehicles using an ETC device or account in the last year. Nevertheless, this is still less than 50% of the total. So you already have 690 million transactions per year, but this is potentially half of what it could be. Keeping in mind, of course, that the total tolls collected in that country, in France, from all vehicles currently exceeds 10.2 billion. In Italy, the proportion of transactions made by ETC device or account is slightly higher, just over 60%. This is largely due to the strength of the domestic provider Intelipass. However, looking at Spain, we have a similar picture to France in that a large number of transactions, nearly 450 million, but again, this is still less than 50% of the total. So what we see here is that there is huge potential still to grow the number of toll transactions that can be made electronically and via a similar medium to a charging or a parking payment. And finally, having looked at the past and the present a little bit, I just wanted to take a brief look at the future. As of today, electric vehicles are the subject of massive attention and development, as we've seen, but again, as we've also seen, they still represent only a small fraction of vehicles on the road. Going forward, however, the growth in EVs will precipitate a fundamental change in the way road infrastructure is funded because, of course, they do not pay traditional fuel duty or taxes in the same way that combustion engine vehicles do. And it shouldn't be forgotten that today fuel duty remains the primary source of road infrastructure funding in every country. We've already seen that the number of toll roads has grown substantially in the past decade, as well as the utilization or the adoption of account or device-based payment methods. But we believe this is just the beginning, and that road pricing could in fact replace fuel taxes altogether within the next decade. And to support this statement, let's just take a quick look at some of the ongoing developments. Here we've got a map of Europe, and I've just highlighted a few countries where there are larger shares of EVs being sold as a portion of all vehicles sold. So first we have Norway, surely Elon Musk's favorite country in the world. Since 2016, the number of toll projects implemented across the country has grown by more than 20% and is set to rise further over the next couple of years. This is on the back of rather more static growth or a static situation over the previous decade. In 2020, as I'm sure many of you know, the proportion of EVs sold exceeded 50% of all new vehicles for the first time. And as a direct consequence of this, Norway is already running technical pilots and conducting serious research into the potential replacement of existing fuel taxes with a kilometre or distance-based charge of some description. It would not surprise me at all if Norway became the first country in the world to do this. The UK, also home to the England football team, of course, has already passed legislation banning the sale of combustion engine vehicles post-2030. And as a direct consequence of this, is already actively exploring the potential of road pricing as a replacement for fuel taxes, which will slowly at first, but then increasingly rapidly disappear. Today, the UK generates something in the region of 30 billion euros through fuel taxation every year. That fuel taxation will disappear within a very short space of time. Both the Netherlands and Finland are making similar investigations as the sales of EVs exceeded 25% and 18% respectively in the last year there. The Netherlands is also quite far down the road to introducing a distance-based scheme for heavy goods vehicles, not necessarily directly related to electric vehicles. However, it is a significant new source of road infrastructure funding, again based on distance travel, and again shifting the burden away from pure fuel taxation. In Sweden, sales of electric vehicles were above 30% in the last year, and again it's no surprise the Swedish government has commissioned various official studies into different forms of road pricing on a national scale. And then finally, We have Germany. Germany's planned car toll, which should have been introduced more than a year ago, 18 months ago, would have represented the introduction of light vehicle charges for the first time and generated quite substantial new revenues. This ultimately didn't go ahead because of legal issues at a European level. But again, it is an example of how new charges are being introduced to take away the burden from pure fuel taxation as a form of funding road infrastructure, because this is no longer a sustainable way of funding roads. And I think the main point to take away from this is that, certainly to take away from this slide, is that with the exception of Norway and Germany's heavy goods vehicle specific toll, which it does have, none of the countries that I've identified here have any significant tolling infrastructure or road pricing schemes in place today. Some have small schemes here and there. The UK has the London congestion charge. Sweden tolls one of its main bridges, the Øresund Bridge from Denmark, and also has a couple of congestion charging schemes in Stockholm and Gothenburg. There's a small tunnel in the Netherlands, but these are very, very small schemes that are generally there to finance specific bridges or tunnels. And this will not remain the case. Countries elsewhere in Europe, again, we looked at France, Italy and Spain, already have substantial toll networks in place, which have been, and will continue to be extended. Just as one example, having actually removed a serious number of toll roads in the last 2 years, actually reduced the size of the network by about 30%, the Spanish government has now very recently committed to a massive new tolling program for its highways, which could see up to 10,000 kilometers of new toll roads introduced in the next 5 years. And this is purely because of funding deficits that will only get worse as EVs grow in popularity. So it was a brief look, and thank you for listening. I think if you take one thing away from this presentation, it should be that tolls and electric vehicles are intricately linked and should be thought of in that way. In the future, you will not have more electric vehicles without more tolling or more road pricing schemes of one description or another. And going forward, it is our vision that the toll payment should and will become a fully integrated in-vehicle payment in exactly the same way that electric vehicle charging is becoming today. If you would like to discuss this more, feel free to contact me via email. You can find my details on previous presentations, or you can just contact me directly over LinkedIn or any other channel you wish, and let's have a conversation about how we make this happen. So thanks again for listening, and enjoy the football.